Hey there, my name's Rod Yates, and you're listening to Humans of Music, a Jaxsta podcast. Each episode, I talk to a music creator or industry professional about their life and career, the ups and downs of their journey, and the lessons they've learned along the way. And my special guest today is Fleet Foxes singer, guitarist, and songwriter, Robin Pecknold. Since forming in Seattle in 2006, Fleet Foxes have carved a singular path through the modern music scene, amassing a global following with their celestial harmonies and gorgeous autumnal indie folk. They broke out with their 2008 self-titled debut album, which was a runaway success that Robin says he found hugely shocking. After their follow-up record, Helplessness Blues, he retreated from the spotlight for a number of years, before the band returned with 2017's Crack Up and now their latest album, Sure. We talk about all that in this interview, as well as Robin's upbringing in Seattle and his path through the Seattle music scene, how he struggled to cope with the sudden success of Fleet Foxes' debut album, and why he can never, ever forgive Richard Gere's character in An Officer and a Gentleman. When I spoke with Robin, he was in his apartment in Lower Manhattan, and we began by talking about Fleet Foxes' latest album, Sure. It came out last September, only 48 hours after it was announced. I've seen that you've said Sure was aimed to be a life preserver in this ocean of bad news. Was that life preserver as much for yourself as for other people?
Oh, for sure. I mean, by the time it was, there were kind of two phases where that was the case. There was the most recent phase was in July, August, kind of getting back to work on the album and finishing it up. And that was very much like saving my life, after 3 months of lockdown and confusion and not knowing what to do or how to finish the album or anything. And then even before that, in 2018, 2019, working on these songs was a real source of joy for me, during kind of, there were some ups and downs in that period after doing a really long tour on the last album that was fairly exhausting for me. And so, yeah, the music was, both working on it in July, August, and then beforehand, it was always this kind of safe haven, finding joy in working on this album for sure.
And when you say that it saved your life in July and August, is that a literal saying?
Oh, no, figuratively. I wasn't at any risk or at all, but just it really gave me purpose, for sure.
Sure. And when you think back to when you started writing these songs a couple of years ago, there's a lyric on the album in Featherweight, I was staging life as a battleground. Is that a reflection of where you were at that point in time and how these songs ended up sort of taking a little bit more of an optimistic bent as a reaction to that?
I think that line, could just apply apply subtly to my entire life up to this point, and not in a kind of really acute way, but just that sense of, dissatisfaction, but out of a desire to improve or to kind of, prove yourself to yourself, that kind of attitude. I think I started to feel was kind of bougie or something in the context of what was going on. And that song is about, trying to let go of that attitude.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I remember seeing an interview with you when you were talking about the fact that Bob Dylan was the gateway to so much for you, and you were conscious of the fact when you were a young man that he made Free Will and Bob Dylan as a young man, and that, Brian Wilson was only 23 when he made Pet Sounds. Just going from what you told me then, did you feel the weight of that early on? Did you feel that need, that almost like that, the weight of time? Like, even though you were quite young when you were feeling that you still thought, gosh, these people made these works as young men, I need to be doing that as well.
100%. There's so much, you absorb so much of that mythology, and then you kind of end up enacting it yourself because you get kind of, convinced that's how it has to be. And so you work as hard as you can, as early as you can, to be at that point by the time you're, try and fail to be at that point by the time you're 22, 23. If you're one of these guys like me that gets swept up in these music mythology jags, and I think that to some degree I've, held on to that mindset maybe a little too long, and that, I'm not married. I don't have like a mortgage. I don't, there are certain adult responsibilities that I've avoided, I think, out of a kind of partly out of a, you know, being a little bit convinced that the younger you are in music, the more, the less, responsibilities you have, the that's how you keep making good work. But with this album done, it's like I'm ready to admit defeat and just get a dog tomorrow.
Right. What was there a moment when you feel like you came to terms with that, or has it been a process?
Sometime this morning, I guess 9:30 this morning, maybe.
Right. So by the sounds of things, you put a lot of pressure on yourself as a young artist.
I have at times, for sure. Yeah, for sure. I think probably too much at times, considering it's just folk rock at the end of the day. It's about kind of, I think on this record, I didn't feel that much pressure, but I felt super I didn't feel like a lot of anxious or insecure pressure. But I felt very curious about how good it could be, or how hard we could work on it. More of a curiosity based energy source than a kind of like refutation or anxiety based one.
Okay. And do you think that's a reflection of age, of just becoming older and maturing?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. There's the song on the record, "Cradling Mother, Cradling Woman," which has that Brian Wilson sample at the beginning of him overdubbing vocals on "Don't Talk, Put Your Head on My Shoulder." And you said that you used to fixate on that, and as a younger artist, and it actually even made you want to do music. Can you take me back to those moments of discovering and hearing that for the first time, and just what effect it had on you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because Pet Sounds is I heard that as a teenager. I got really into it. I think I was 14 or something when that box set came out. And so when I got into the album, I think that was already out. And it was a very confusing record because you can tell that it's really complex musically, and there's a lot of interesting key changes and chord changes and melodic ideas, and it's all so brilliantly arranged. And so, but it's not it's not the Ramones. You can't really unpack it with a 14-year-old's education, and so that I think that part of being confused and inspired by Pet Sounds, and then hearing that little snippet where you're hearing Brian add voice after voice after voice after voice, and you can really pick apart each one and what each one is doing, and how those voices were, those were the same chord movements that were present in other aspects of the song, and similar to those in other songs on Pet Sounds. And so you're hearing it in this kind of deconstructed way, but also in this way that it didn't cost him any money, aside from just needing a tape machine. But there were no hired gun, no session musicians, no wrecking crew. It's just him layering vocal after vocal. And so it was this weird kind of Rosetta Stone or something for me. That little recording was kind of my way into thinking about making music myself, and also the kind of inspiration for making overdub heavy records, which all these records have always been overdub heavy. And then, that kind of, avoiding using orchestral instruments for the most part. I think I like getting as close to that vibe as possible without using, without taking it to that extreme, that kind of bougie extreme.
How did you discover that record? Was there someone that was putting albums such as Pet Sounds in front of you, or were you curious yourself?
My dad, yeah, he was a bass player and a luthier. He built bass guitars and electric guitars, and so we were getting. I think he didn't start showing us records until we were like until I was a teenager. But it was just Stevie Wonder, and growing up, we just listening to Stevie Wonder and Cat Stevens as a kid, and then him showing us Pet Sounds and Zeppelin and all. Steely Dan. He loved Steely Dan. Named my sister after the Asia album.
Yeah.
And so we were just, it was a musical family.
Yeah. And I think your dad played bass in a soul band called the Fathoms. Did he ever talk to you about that?
We had to tease that out of him. He would play, I mean, he would just play around the house like all day, after dinner, he'd just put an album on, and like a Miles Davis album on, and play bass along with it. And we were always so impressed. He play an improv fretless bass on a bass he made. What a guy!
Wow.
And and so he was always a super inspiring guy. Still is.
Yeah, and I read an interview where you didn't actually say this, but the journalist said this. I think it was in Rolling Stone some years ago. They described your upbringing like the Partridge family, all singing together while your dad played guitar and your mum played piano. Um, does that resonate with you? Is that a fair statement? Was it like that in your house?
Not really. Sometimes, I mean, I feel like, my mom, there was, by the time I was like 20, she was like, "Oh yeah, I can play piano," but she never played piano around the house. And then I like put some sheet music in front of her, and she just played it perfectly straight away, like like she'd never missed a beat. And so that was a weird secret to keep from us for that many years.
Why do you think
And then
she did that?
I don't know, I just wasn't on her mind or something, but it was just in there. Never forgot it.
Mm.
But there was a period, I guess, like while working on the first Fleet Foxes record, where we would, get together and sing as like me and my brother and sister and my parents, just kind of for fun, around the holidays, and then some of those that became the beginning of the intro to the first Fleet Foxes album. Is just me singing with my family.
Yeah, and you mentioned your dad was a luthier. Was that his full-time profession?
He up until they started having kids, and then he went back to school to train to be a film editor, and then he did that.
Right, and did that become his career then? Film editing?
Film editing, and then post production on film editing. I guess that film editing is post production, but more aspects of making films for companies in Seattle and just regional stuff, music video editing and yeah.
Right, music video editing. So he would have because I know your brother directed videos for Fleet Foxes.
Yeah, both of the gauntlets that he threw down, we picked up one each. Yeah.
What about your mum? What did she do?
She was a teacher, ESL teacher, English as a second language, and then she was a court stenographer. And she started teaching full time once I was 8, I think.
Clearly, though, the arts were important to your family. Just judging from what you just told me then, and as you mentioned, that I think Asia is your manager, has gone on to become your manager, and obviously your brother did the videos. So, was being artist seen as a noble pursuit in your household?
It wasn't like some bohemian situation. It wasn't like we grew up in a van and we were like all. I feel like once Asia and Sean and I started getting into being creative, for lack of a better term, then they were like, "Oh yeah, we used to do all that stuff. We lived in a teepee in the 60s. Oh yeah, we I had a band. Oh yeah, I was in Officer and a Gentleman. Oh yeah, we did all this stuff." And then it kind of came out, stuff that was more ambient while they were, being good, middle class parents, working day in, day out, putting food on the table,
Yeah.
Once we kind of expressed interest in that stuff, it all kind of came out that was totally how they met and how they fell in love and how they kind of lived for many years,
Yeah. Did you just say that one of your parents was in an Officer and a Gentleman?
My dad was the singer in the party band in Officer and a Gentleman.
Wow.
Yeah.
What did you think the first time you saw that?
Well, I thought it was cool, but then when I watched it again, I noticed that they actually diss the party band. Like Richard Gere insults them, right. And he just wanted to get out of there and like sleep with this girl, and then he insults my father like multiple times. So I have like this grudge against Richard Gere that's like I'm not over it. I can't. I don't have any closure on it. Someone said that it was. He only insults the band because there's this handsome singer and he's trying to, the girl likes, and, Gere is trying to kind of make himself look better to the girl he's trying to court, who obviously would rather be with my dad. Which kind of makes sense, but it's still, I don't know. You don't need to. It's been a deep family trauma for years.
Okay. And so you grew up in Kirkland. Once music started to become important to you, growing up in a place like that, could you see a path to becoming a musician?
Oh, yeah, 100%. I mean, Seattle was the perfect place for that as far as I'm concerned. Because, we were inculcated, Nirvana was inculcated in us, and Pearl Jam, all of that stuff was, we were absorbing that at the same time we're like learning how to read, or so that's, as kind of formative to be like, we're from Seattle, we're from the music town. And then, Kirkland, there's this whole constellation of like teen centers and DIY venues on the east side of Seattle that were all ages, so we could start going to shows as soon as we wanted, when we were 14.
What shows did you go to?
A lot of like hardcore shows at the Kirkland Teen Center and at the Redmond Firehouse. But, once I had my learner's permit, we were just going to shows all the time. The Microphones would play, or, other kind of indie acts like Modest Mouse, or I can't say that I would have wanted to play music if I didn't grow up in Seattle. And because it felt like just the perfect place for it and the perfect kind of size city, because by the time I wanted to move out, I was paying $300 a month to live alone,
right.
In an apartment in town. And there were, Sub Pop was like the final boss of this weird little town that had, 25 music venues, and you knew exactly where you wanted to play, what night of the week. And, it was just kind of a playground kind of for music through my early 20s and late teens.
You've described yourself as pretty much checking out at the age of 15 from any kind of peer group, and you just sort of focused on playing music and writing songs and never really going to school. Why did you check out at that age?
I think that growing up with older siblings, I was used to being around older people, and I felt like I didn't check out of peer group. I feel like I found more peers among older musicians that were, I got a high off of being like the young kid who was finishing high school at community college, but spending most, just doing that 3 days a week and spending most of my time working at a health food store and then playing shows. I liked being the kind of like, young, like the youngest guy going in this weird little community of people.
Yeah.
So I found, and I just related to, people that were also wanting to make music, and they just happened to be 5 to 7 years older than me, like my siblings,
Right.
And then there were, a few people from school that I stayed really good friends with that, once I was kind of, because my high school just got kind of like bougie and like cokey, and I don't know, it was just kind of weird. And like I just wasn't relating to it at all. And the community college classes were more interesting and harder, because I was a good student. So it was just kind of like, just made sense.
Did you say your high school got kind of cokey?
Yeah, I just had that kind of like rich girls doing cocaine, and I don't know, it's just like it wasn't the best environment.
Right. Well, one of your friends from around that time was, of course, Skyler. Play guitar in Fleet Foxes. What were your first impressions of him?
I thought he was awesome. He was like funny, weird kid. And we met, our parents set us up on a play date, kind of junior high, I guess, because our elementary schools, were fed into the same junior high. So we didn't that was a weird transition. I remember, going from 6 years with the same group of kids, and then you have to meet this whole group of kids that had spent 6 years together. And it takes a year or two to kind of find new friends in that, following that kind of like feeder, situation. So, and then we were really close right away. We got into, bonded over like video games and Japanese anime, and I would always stay over at his house. And, eventually my parents moved around a lot, and we eventually lived close enough that I could just walk over to Sky's house, and we would just hang out for days.
And you've mentioned that you you left high school at year 10 and then finished off at community college. What was your plan? Was music it for you by then? And did you see community college as a place where you could do that part-time and then hang out with the older kids and keep developing music?
Yeah, I mean, I was very gung-ho about wanting to make music and wanting to get good at that. And I think that I saw that I saw the things that I needed to do to make that happen. Like, that didn't seem confusing to me. And it didn't seem like, because we were in Seattle and because, like I said, like Sub Pop was the final boss. And if you got to Sub Pop, then you made it, you beat the game kind of a little, just like it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to fuck off and just be a lazy musician. It was like, no, it was like, I need to get going on this right now and get really good at this. And I know all the things I need to do and all the places I need to play. And like, I know what I need to do in this ecosystem to like, make this happen, you know? And I didn't have another plan, but I had such a, directed energy towards this plan that it didn't like that seemed like a better option than like, well, I guess I'll go to college and study like graphic design or something.
Yeah.
Because it was all there. Like we were in Seattle. It was totally possible,
Did you have any other interests at the time?
No.
Just music?
No, I don't. I thought that I thought that would be a waste of time. I mean, I since then I've gotten into all kinds of other things, but I didn't. At the time, I was just kind of monastically focused on getting better at writing songs and making music.
Yeah, where do you think that drive comes from? Was that something you inherited from your parents, or was it just within you?
I don't know. I mean, I definitely saw my parents. They're great. They set a great example. They worked really hard, and they were good, solid people. But I mean, they weren't, it's not like they're not wealthy people. Like, it wasn't like I knew that I would always have a trust fund to rely on, it was kind of like, I think that, I was making this kind of chaotic choice because music, it's so rare for somebody to succeed at doing music, obviously, but I was doing it with like a lot of intention, with a lot of like passion,
Right. One of the part-time jobs you did was at Bimbos Bitchin' Burrito Kitchen, which sounded
nice.
quite pivotal to informing your musical education. Tell me about your time there.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like in Seattle, that was, at the time, it was like, if you want to be a musician, you got to work at Bimbos, So I got the job at Bimbos because the guys from Modest Mouse and people that played in the Shins or Band of Horses or Grand Archives or other Seattle bands, everyone was Tiny Vipers. Everyone was in and out of Bimbos because they, it was easy to get shifts covered if you were playing a show, and you just wanted to be around those people because they were the ones working, and getting signed to Sub Pop and getting like, being active, and they were setting, they were that was the community, and so to get a job at Bimbos, was great. So I got to listen to music with these great older guys and women every day, and like hear what they were listening to, and hear their own songs too, and it was just a complete, like, that was the kind of like internship in the music business. That's what I mean. Like, it felt like I did go to college, but it was just this kind of unstructured college of like Bimbos was my internship where I meant, my my mentor is like, this guy, Joram, who had the best music taste in town, and he'd play records every night, and then, the whole ecosystem of venues was like that. Those were my, classes, and like the shows were your exams, and I don't know, it still had that feeling to me.
It sounds like a magical time. Do you think you appreciated it? It sounds like you appreciated it, but do you think you recognized what it was at the time?
I did. Yeah, for sure. I loved it. I mean, I remember, because 2006, when I was 20, my brother and I still talk about 2006 all the time. We're like, man, 2006, we were killing it. Those were the days, because he had this basement studio around the corner from Numos, the venue in Seattle, and he was making films and animations, and I was working on music down in the industrial district, and we were just like, it was before any album came out, or before any of that stuff, and we were just kind of like, yeah, it was a super charmed time to be in Seattle, and we definitely, we definitely knew it at the time too.
Yeah. Do you miss the innocence of those days?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, that was, I mean, I think, like, obviously you can't force something like that, but it is, and you just have to be grateful if you get an experience like that. You know, you get a couple of charmed years like with that feeling. And I've had plenty of charmed times since then too. You know, great times working with people and great, you know, periods of you know, friends and different eras and stuff. But that one was cool because it was before any kind of, you know, I guess touring or any kind of, you know, it was just kind of this little, innocent antediluvian time or something.
After the break, Robin talks about the songs he's written that are so dark they scare him on Jaxsta's Humans of Music. Welcome back to Humans of Music and my interview with Fleet Foxes singer, guitarist and songwriter Robin Pecknold. I'm always interested in I guess, that transition from when something stops being the dream and becomes the reality. So at that point you were dreaming and striving and working hard for a career in music. And then at some point, the career in music became just that. It became your career. Did that change your relationship with music in any way?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I mean, I think that, like, you know, my ambitions for the first record were pretty small, I think. Like, when I say that Sub Pop was the final boss, it was, like, truly, like, I think if I had just put out an album on Sub Pop and it had sold 2,000 copies or something, and then that was it, I would have looked at that as like a successful go at a Seattle music career. Do you understand? You understand what I mean?
Yeah.
It wasn't like I wasn't really thinking internationally or even nationally, because we had this little ecosystem that was the be all and end all. You know, a lot of people never thought outside of Seattle. You know, and I was kind of one of those people, in a lot of ways. You know, and so I think that the fact that album was so successful so quickly after it, so just right away, so successful internationally, was hugely shocking, because that wasn't really like in the game, like that wasn't the goal, you know, like that wasn't in the game plan. There was other stuff that was totally in the game plan, as far as, but it was all Seattle related, you know, and so that shifted my thinking completely. It had to. And then it had to, you know, the performance aspect and the continuous touring and supporting, you know, all these incredible experiences, getting to do that, or do Saturday Night Live, or, like, you know, go to England 500 times, or go to Australia 3 times on one album, or, you know, all that stuff was just like, what is going on? This is just wild, you know?
And was there an element of you that was like a deer in the headlights, just trying to figure out how to operate?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, because it was like learning on the job, you know, like Asia's still the band's manager. My sister's still the band's manager, and she's an incredible manager, and she does an excellent job, and she always has. But we were both learning on the job, you know, and everyone in the band was learning on the job, and kind of, you know, just figuring out, okay, how do we get the gear to this place, or who do we talk to about this thing, or, you know, where do we stay, or is this the hotel we were booked at, or, you know, just all the kind of like confusing stuff that's not an issue anymore, because it's all in this kind of, you know, better planned system.
Yeah.
But it was just learning on the job, and it was kind of, you know, the fact that all this stuff was happening was very surreal, and kind of like not something I was, you know, had been visualizing or had been kind of mentally preparing for. And then it was just being the fact that I was, Sky and I were 22 at the time, and then most of the people in the band at the time were actually 5 to 10 years older than us. So there were weird kind of like, you know, because we ended up going into Seattle and kind of asking guys that we admired in other bands to be in Fleet Foxes, you know.
Sure.
Just kind of, so a little bit of us for the live thing, a little bit of a like Seattle supergroup thing, which is good because everyone did a, you know, great job with it. But there were dynamic things in there that were weird for sure.
Yeah. And you mentioned some of the practical things you learned, like just how to get your gear from A to B, or how to get yourselves from A to B. But what about, I guess, the mental and the emotional and the physical things that you had to learn to be thrown into a touring world for a couple of years and figure out how to cope with that? What were some of the biggest lessons and the ways you developed to cope with that change?
I don't think I ever really coped that well with the touring stuff. And I don't think that um, I think the last tour we did was definitely too long, but it was a much nicer tour. People were kind of like exercising and eating like kale and, taking care of themselves and, whatever. But the early days, you're just a subhuman, just shoved in a van and just stink to high heaven. And you're just kind of a road dog rat, and I think, one thing I'm curious about is like, I'm proud of, the 3 records like that have been made since the first one, but I do feel a little curious about what would have happened if the first one came out and did sell 500 copies, and like what kind of music, because I guess like the success of the first one just changed the whole game as far as like what the next records needed to be, or what I thought they needed to be. So I would be curious, I guess, that's one thought I've had. It's like, man, what if that record had flopped? Like, I wonder what music would have gotten made, and maybe it would have been much worse, or maybe the success of it forced this, forced a certain level of quality. I think there are people that for whom each one of the 4 records, there's it's each one is someone's favorite, for some reason or another.
Well, that ties in with a quote of yours, which I read, where you said that you want to maintain a beginner's mindset as a hack, because most bands, when they have fewer obligations, could be a little bit more free. Is that the reaction to what you were saying, that you do try and put yourself mentally back at the beginning, where you're not, I guess you don't have to contend with your reputation while you're creating?
Yeah, I mean, I think the time I felt that most explicitly was just the last few months working on shore, knowing that there was no big tour attached to it, and there was no kind of not going to be a big promo campaign before it came out, and so that stuff just kind of like, it kind of felt like you're working on I don't know, that like the stakes just felt super low, And
I've seen you talk about the album as well, and saying that it could actually, this is maybe the first album you've made since your debut where it could exist on its own 2 feet. It wasn't the follow-up to the successful debut. It wasn't the comeback album after 6 years away that Crack Up was.
Yeah.
But is that how Helplessness Blues and Crack Up felt to you? That Helplessness Blues, that's the follow-up to the successful debut, and Crack Up is the comeback album. Did you feel like they had those weights around them?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that's tough for me to balance is like, to what extent are you writing songs, and to what extent are you like writing a career, because it's like, on some level, I mean, they can be symbiotic, I mean, it's not like, I don't think there are any like bad faith songs on any of those albums, but I think that, and everyone, I mean, it's not like Radiohead are like, well, Kid A just happened out of nowhere. It wasn't because we wanted to totally change it up after OK Computer. No one's not thinking about their like catalog as a whole, and how they're, how that is kind of even giving them creative inspiration, because that's cool. You can look at your last album and be like, cool, it'll be different. This one will be different in these ways, and that's can be a source of, generative like ideas,
Yeah.
But it's different from, I'm going to sit down and write a reggae song this morning and put it on SoundCloud,
Sure.
Which would be sweet.
I think it's interesting, your approach to fame or to the success of the band was typified by the fact that after touring for Helplessness Blues, you took some time away from the band. You moved to Port Townsend for a while, and I think you did a woodworking course while you were there. Was there pressure to keep going from external forces, though? Was taking time away from the band a difficult thing to do?
No, I mean, I think like, so, for me, it was like I was saying before, like, when I was a teenager, late teens, early 20s, it really was like Sub Pop is the final boss of the Seattle music video game.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was expecting that, that was the brass ring or whatever. And I wasn't then expecting to spend 4 extra years just doing music, and just touring constantly, and then making another album, and then touring that relentlessly. I wasn't planning for that. I think if I had just kind of, if the music thing hadn't worked out, I would have, become a more, whole person. But I found myself at this point at age 26 where I was like, I have thought about nothing but music for 10 years. And I am like, I have no other skills or kind of other interests, you know? And so I just felt so kind of, like one dimensional, you know, that I just had to do other things, you know, I just had to like, and then a lot of other stuff was becoming really interesting to me. And it was, you know, I guess as a kind of a break from that mindset.
Yeah. But, you know, you're in the music business. You know, there are people who make a living off Fleet Foxes, off you being on the road. Was there no pressure from those forces to keep the momentum happening?
Well, I think that like, I also, like I said, you know, even though like the first Fleet Foxes album and Helplessness Blues were well reviewed by like respected websites and publications, and they were also susceptible to getting swept into this like subsequent folk boom fad thing that was like way more amplified than those two records were. And I felt like if we continued to be in the marketplace and like on the festival circuit, the options were either to try and compete with that fad by amplifying more, or trying to switch direction away from that fad in a kind of like reactionary way, which felt like which to me seemed like giving that fad too much credit, you know? Yeah. And so, because it wasn't as creatively interesting to me as other things that were going on. So I don't see how anything could have happened besides going away for a little bit,
right?
Because it just seemed like there was just a little too much baggage to be carrying in public, like trying to keep on doing that. And I was probably giving all that stuff just too much credit, and I could have just, you know, made something and just kept going and just, you know, but those things were they just felt too heavy. It was weird to get these like lines drawn between Fleet Foxes and then stuff that was like immensely more popular that I didn't really respond to, you know?
Right.
And it was just like, I don't know what to do with this information. And so that was part of it too. And it was also, you know, simultaneous with that was this kind of like, oh yeah, I've only, you know, there's plenty else I can explore in the world. Like I can, and I actually like how I like the mindset I'm in when I'm not thinking about music. You know, I like the things I gravitate towards. I like the things that come to mind and that seem interesting when my music is kind of tabled for a period.
Yeah. Well, you did that. Well, you did that woodworking course in Port Townsend, and then you enrolled in an undergrad program at Columbia University. How did both of those pursuits fulfill you at the time?
The woodworking thing was super fun. That was all like hand tool woodworking. I've been able to kind of use some of that information. I use some of that knowledge since then, here and there, like building stuff or, you know, setting things up or whatever. Columbia was different because that was kind of a, you know, starting from scratch. I had like all these credits from community college, but they had lapsed by the time I enrolled at Columbia, so I was starting from scratch with an undergrad. And I was just taking, you know, fairly remedial classes at first, but then I would fill the schedule with classes in literature or in visual art, you know, just various things that were interesting to me. Doing that simultaneously with just like learning a new city in New York and kind of like surfing. I took up surfing around the same time and you know, just making new friends and just kind of like living a different life for a couple of years. I don't know really, like, I think I was also just doubting myself a lot. You know, I think I was like doubting because I had been so self-directed and so laser focused on music, and I'd ended up having had so many great experiences, but then having hit these kind of, you know, roadblocks or things I didn't know how to process or didn't know what to do with. And I was just like kind of doubting my decision to not go to college in the first place, even though when I was like 17, I was dead set against going to college. I thought that was a death sentence, you know?
Yeah.
And now I've come back around where I'm like slightly proud to like have basically dropped out of high school and done community college instead, you know. But I think I was just doubting. It was kind of like a, I don't know, Cartesian analysis kind of phase. Like, well, if I just do the exact opposite of everything I did, is there any value in that? And just seeing how that feels, you know?
And I think you've mentioned that during that period at Columbia, there was a depressive period for you as well. Was that tied into those thoughts that you were just talking about then, that uncertainty about that doubting yourself?
Yeah, I think it was a few things. You know, I think it was, um, you know, I mean, I don't want to. I mean, that requires, you know, sensitive parsing, I guess. But
Sure.
it was. I mean, I was confused at the time about what I was doing or why. I think confused about what the future would hold. There was definitely like a winter where, you know, there was just blizzard after blizzard, and I'm like spending all day like reading 10 hours a day, not seeing anybody, not really relating to anyone that I was meeting, or, you know, I think there were, you know, there was definitely a semester where I was like, this was a huge mistake, but I had a pride about it that I was kind of like, but I have to see it through. You know, I can't just, I set this in motion. I need to see it through however I can. And then I ultimately didn't. Like, Joanna Newsom asked me to open for her on tour in 2015 and in 2016. And so then I stopped doing that program to open for her and then make Crack Up.
What was that like when you went out with Joanna? Did it feel like you were back where you should be?
It was kind of a rude awakening at first. You know, I think like I'm glad to be at this point now where there's like a tour behind. There's a 2-year Crack Up tour behind me, and there's this new album that is done. But I think that first couple shows back with Joanna, after not playing a show for like 3 years or something, or maybe 4, was pretty rough. Was not like at the top of my game, I don't think. And like the material I was playing was like, I was like, oh, this is actually not, you know, compared to kind of like the first album where you're playing shows twice a week in Seattle or something, or, you know, open mics or whatever it is. You know, there was none of that while I was in school. So you're just like, oh yeah, you can't just like turn these things on and off. No one's like, you know, going. It's weird to be going from like, you know, English seminar to then flying to Belgium and playing in front of 4,000 people before the best musician alive, you know. And like that was a really weird transition, and I was like, I'm not actually ready for this. And I had to work, you know, I was like, yeah, I need to work a lot harder on the music stuff, you know. I had to get back into that mindset.
Were you sensing that from external people, from the audience that you were playing towards? Did you sense that they were feeling you weren't good enough, or was that completely coming from you, that you were feeling you weren't there yet?
Well, just technically, the main thing with that was that I had written all the songs that I played, the new songs that I played on that tour. I'd written them all in my apartment, and so I was singing them much lower in a much lower register than I was than I even realized, you know. And so it just was it was just flat. It was just like flat performances of the songs, and you know, like the next night I'm like trying to figure out how to relearn all the guitar parts so I can sing, you know, sing them a little louder and a little brighter, you know.
Yeah.
Just that kind of stuff. Like, you know, yeah.
So did you take that as a challenge, or was it like, oh, how am I going to do this? Was it tough?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, you know, I guess one reason I have to keep doing this at this point, you know, thinking about making a 5th album now, or, you know, moving into like you know, 10 after 10 years of doing it, is that it does seem like the problems get actually much harder, you know. Like making a good first album seems actually pretty chill to me, you know, and thinking about trying to make a good 5th one seems like way more difficult. And so I think like when a problem seems really hard to solve or like really specific, then that really holds my attention, you know?
And it is interesting, isn't it? Like, not many bands are remembered for their 5th album. Like once you start getting your 5th album, your 6th album, your 7th album, there is a challenge that this is the one that I'm going to be that this is the one that's going to be worthy of Fleet Fox's catalogue. Does it
Totally.
feel? It feels like that.
Oh, for sure. And there's a kind of masochistic pleasure in knowing that, and being like, but the fifth one will be excellent, and because I feel like I've had to work harder on every record to make it just kind of like about the same level of quality,
Yeah. Well, the next, you've spoken about the next record and how it's going to have 9 songs and I guess complete the 24 song cycle between Shore and this record. And I think you've said that each song will represent a different hour of the day. Which hour to you is the loneliness of that 24-hour clock?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I actually have songs for that are like some stuff actually that I wrote during the Columbia period that I was just way too dark to kind of do anything with for a while, and I was thinking like, oh man, maybe those songs could be like, that could be 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. for this expanded version, where there's a song for every hour of the day.
Yeah.
And then, so yeah, I mean, that's the place to put it. 4 p.m. also can be kind of dark. You're like crashing a little bit.
Right. So you were still writing while you were at Columbia. You hadn't just put down things. Well, I guess you just said that when you were on tour with Joanna, you were playing those songs that you'd been writing, but there was obviously a mood to them. Yeah,
I have like 6 songs that I still just kind of make me a little bit scared when I even try playing them, or a little bit sad.
Wow. And will they be on this companion piece to Shore?
I think some of them, yeah, but some I don't think I could ever release. Yeah.
Wow. What is it just lyrically, or what is it about them that's so close to the bone?
Yeah, just too real. I don't know. To that time,
Yeah. So just to finish up, Robin, Jaxsta is all about giving credit where credit is due. Are there people that you would like to give credit to for helping you get where you are today?
Oh man, so many people. I mean, Asia Pecknold, Sean Pecknold, Phil Eck, Megan Jasper at Sub Pop, Kate Bush at Sub Pop, Simon Raymond at Bell Union, and Mark at Bell Union, Mark Byrne, Duncan Jordan at Bell Union, Cheyenne, my sister's boyfriend when I was 17, who gave me the Grateful Dead songbook with all the chords in it. He helped out a lot. Aaron Menino was a friend of mine who helped me record my first demo EP when I was 16 or something.
Yeah.
With solo songs. Shane Tutmark, who had a band called Delore that I played bass in for a tour when I was 19. Learned a lot about music from him. Everyone I've played with over the years, Sky and Casey and Christian and Morgan and everybody, and met since then. Like Beatrice, who made this record with me, who did such an amazing job. Everyone who played on this album and every other album.
You just mentioned recording your first demo at 16. How excited were you at that moment?
I was so excited. I went to his house and he had a studio in his basement, and he was like, "This microphone costs $200." I was like, "Oh my God, what?" I was like, "Be very careful. This costs $200."
Do you still have a copy of the demo?
Yeah, my mom has all that stuff cataloged.
I'd love to hear that. Well, do you think that'll ever make a Fleet Foxes box set?
Oh, I don't know. That stuff's pretty weak, but just figuring it out.
Awesome. Well, look, Robin, thank you so much for your time. It's been so great chatting to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
And that's it for another episode of Humans of Music. A big thanks to Robin for his time, and thank you for listening. This episode was mixed by Lachlan Mitchell from Parliament Studios in Annandale, and the incidental music and theme song were written and performed by Sam Lockwood. Please remember to subscribe to the Humans of Music podcast so you never miss an episode, or even better, share it amongst your friends and rate and review it. And remember, next time you need to know who wrote a song, who produced a song, who engineered it, who played on it, who sang on it, who did anything on it, head to jaxsta.com for all your official music credit information. Until the next episode of Humans of Music, I'm Rod Yates. Thanks for listening.